The library was the quietest place left on the planet. That was not a comfort. It was a fact. Vane wrote it down the same way he wrote everything down, without decoration, without feeling, in the small and careful script he had used for 60 years. The fact sat on the page. He moved to the next one. Outside, the city made no sound. 3 weeks ago, it had been full of noise, vehicles, voices, the low hum of power lines running beneath the streets. Now, the streets were empty. The people were in the shelters below ground. The power lines still hummed, but quieter, like they too were trying not to be noticed. Vane was not in a shelter. He had a job. The vault shelves were lined up along the eastern wall, 12 of them, each one the size of a small trunk, built from a material the engineering department had developed 40 years ago for deep space geological surveys. They were designed to survive pressure, heat, impact. They had survived tests involving all three. The engineers were confident. The engineers were also in the shelters. Vane lifted the first data core, a flat disk no larger than his palm, and turned it in the light. 60 years of astronomical records, species catalogs, the entire documented history of Salvari contact with other civilizations, which was modest, because the Salvari had not been explorers so much as observers. They watched, they recorded, they built libraries. He placed the disk inside the shell, sealed it, moved to the next one. He worked slowly, not because he was tired, though he was. He worked slowly because there was a cracked stylus on the table beside him, and every few minutes he would pick it up, look at it, and put it down again. He had owned it for 60 years. The crack ran along the barrel in a thin diagonal line, a small accident from his 3rd year of service that had never gotten worse, and that he had never gotten around to fixing. He put it in the vault, took it back out, set it on the table, went back to the data cores. The records he was sealing covered everything his people had built and thought and argued about and discovered across 4,000 years. Mathematics, medicine, philosophy, the 7 competing schools of architectural theory that had dominated scholarly debate for 3 centuries and had produced, in his personal opinion, mostly headaches. All of it going into shells designed to outlast the people who made it. He had run the numbers twice. The vault would survive. He was confident in this, the way he was confident in anything that had sufficient evidence behind it. What came after survival was less clear. Who would find the vault was a question with no good data to support an answer. Whether there would be anyone left in this system to find it, or whether the Drakval would locate it first and simply destroy it as they were destroying everything else, these were variables he could not resolve. He wrote this in the record. Then he moved on. The Council's final broadcast came through at midday. He was on his 8th vault shell. He stopped working and listened. The high speaker's voice came through the room's single speaker, clear and steady. She spoke in formal register, the kind used for state occasions and the opening of new libraries. She addressed not the Drakval, there was no point in that, but history itself. She spoke of what the Salvari had been, what they had contributed. She thanked the people of the civilization, which was a thing that still existed in the shelters below ground, still breathing, still waiting, still hoping, in the specific quiet way people hope when hope has mostly run out. Not once across 11 minutes. Vane recorded this. He noted the duration. He noted the formal register. He noted the way she paused once, for approximately 2 seconds, before the final paragraph. Not from weakness, he believed, but from the same thing that made him keep picking up the stylus, something that had no entry in the official record. He noted everything except what his hands were doing during the pause. The young aide came in the afternoon. His name was Sella. He was 22 years old and had been assigned to the documentation office 8 weeks ago, which meant he had spent most of his assignment helping prepare for the end of everything. He was thin and very serious, and he moved through the library with a care that suggested he understood what the books around him were worth. He helped Vayan carry the sealed vault shells to the reinforced subchamber below the building. They worked without talking. On the third trip, while they were setting down a particularly heavy shell, Sayla asked if the vaults would really survive. Vayan said yes. Sayla set his end down carefully. He looked at the chamber around them, the thick walls, the sealed door, the darkness that would come when they turned the lights off for the last time. He asked if anyone would ever find them. Vayan did not hesitate. He told the boy yes, gave him the answer with the same confidence he used for facts with sufficient evidence. The boy nodded, looked relieved, and went to get the next shell. Vayan stayed in the chamber for a moment. Then he went back to work. He wrote the lie in the record, not as a lie, as a data point. A response was given. The response was intended to provide functional comfort, rather than accurate information. He left no further comment. The record did not require his opinion of himself. By evening he had sealed 11 of the 12 shells. The last one he left open. That was the one for the ongoing record, the one he would add to until there was nothing left to add. He sat down with the cracked stylus and opened to a fresh page, and wrote the first line of the final entry. We were not a warrior people. This was once considered irrelevant. He stopped there, read it back, decided it was accurate. The Solvari had lived 4,000 years without building a military in any real sense of the word. They had people who stood between the population and danger, border units, civil defense groups, individuals who volunteered for the harder jobs. But they had no soldiers, no doctrine, no tradition of organized violence pointed outward at the universe. For most of their history, this had not mattered. Outside, the sky turned the dark red color it turned every evening, the light bending through the upper atmosphere in a way that the astronomy department had documented at length. Beautiful, they had always called it. Several poets had written about it. There were 43 separate descriptions of the evening sky in the city's literary archive, all of them in the vault now, sealed and waiting. Vayan sat with the stylus and watched the red light move across the library floor. 72 hours until the Drakval arrived, according to the current tracking data. He put the stylus down, picked it up again. 72 hours was enough time to finish the record properly. The sensors picked them up 48 hours before the Drakval were due to arrive. Vayan was in the library when the alert came through on the small communication unit the council had insisted he keep on his desk. He had been ignoring it for most of the morning. He was in the middle of a detailed record of the city's water distribution infrastructure, not because it was urgent, but because it was something, and he needed something to write. He picked up the unit, read the message, and set it back down. Then he picked it up again, and read it a second time. Objects had entered the system. Fast. Wrong trajectory for the Drakval fleet, which was still on course from the northern approach. These objects were coming from the west, from a direction that had nothing on the long-range charts, except empty space, and much further out, a small star with no recorded inhabitants. He went to the window. The sky was still the ordinary daytime color, nothing visible yet. But the tracking data on the unit showed the objects clearly. Small, numerous, moving in a way that no natural body moved. Controlled, intentional. For 6 minutes, every Solvari with access to a screen believed the Drakval had simply arrived early from a second direction. There were reports of people in the shelters beginning to say their final words to one another. The council sent 3 rapid messages in those 6 minutes, each one more tightly worded than the last. Then the tracking team sent a correction. The objects were slowing down. Drakval ordnance did not slow down. Vayan wrote, objects of unknown origin have entered the system. They are not behaving as weapons. Current analysis cannot determine what they are behaving as. He went back to the water infrastructure record, and then stopped, because he could not concentrate, and there was no point pretending otherwise. He pulled his chair to the window instead, and sat there with his stylus and his notebook, and waited. The first one came through the upper atmosphere like a stone dropped through still water. Fast, straight, trailing heat. Then another. Then many more, too many to count easily, spreading across the sky in a pattern that made no sense for an attack, and made no sense for anything else he knew about. They were not targeting the city. They were not targeting the shelters. They were falling into the open ground between the city's edge and the ridgeline to the east. The same ridgeline where, in approximately 46 hours, the Drakval ground forces would make their initial push. Vayan wrote, "The objects appear to be positioning themselves between the population and the approaching enemy. This is not consistent with any known Drakval tactic. Revising classification. These are not Drakval." He underlined the last 4 words, not for emphasis, because his hand did it before he told it to. The objects hit the ground hard. He felt the impacts through the library floor, a low series of thuds that moved up through the stone and into the chair and into him. From the window he could see the dust rising from the landing sites, pale columns of it drifting in the morning wind. Then the objects opened. They cracked apart the way something cracks when it has been holding itself together under pressure, and the pressure is finally gone. The pieces fell outward, and out of each one came figures, upright, two-limbed, moving immediately and with complete purpose, none of the stumbling or adjustment that might be expected from something that had just fallen from the sky in a metal container. Even from the library window, across several hundred meters of open ground, Vayan could hear them, voices calling to each other in a language that the translation unit on his desk rendered as static and fragments. Equipment sounds, the particular clatter of things being checked and readied. One of them looked up at the library building, looked directly at the window where Vayan was sitting, raised one of its upper limbs, and moved it back and forth in a rapid lateral motion. Vayan wrote, "One of the figures has performed a gesture in my direction. The gesture consists of a rapid side-to-side movement of the upper appendage. Purpose unknown, possibly a signal, possibly a threat display. Recommend further observation before drawing conclusions." He did not wave back. He was a scholar, not a diplomat. The council reached him an hour later with the kind of message that began with 3 different honorifics and ended with a request that felt very much like an order. Their linguistics team had been in the Southern District when the Drakval advanced scouts had made their first pass 2 weeks ago. The council had other scholars, good ones, but Vayan had been in the documentation office longer than anyone, had worked with more outside contact records than anyone, and the translation unit on his desk was the best one they had left. He gathered his notebook and his stylus and went outside. The ground between the library and the landing sites was uneven, crossed with the old irrigation channels the city had used before the underground system was built. He picked his way across it carefully. The figures, he still did not have a word for them, had set up a kind of perimeter, organized and efficient, and several of them tracked him as he approached. Not with weapons raised, just watching. The one who had waved at him came forward to meet him. It was large, not threateningly so, but large in the way that certain things were large, and you noticed it before you noticed anything else. It wore equipment he did not have words for yet. Its face was broad and tired-looking, with the particular quality of tiredness that came not from a single bad night, but from many of them stacked on top of each other. He held the translation unit between them and activated it. What followed was approximately 20 minutes of fragmented exchange, half guesses, and a lot of pointing at things. The unit was better with written input than spoken. At one point they spent 4 minutes on a single concept, because the unit kept rendering it differently. By the end, Vayan had a rough map of what the figure, the commander apparently, intended to do with the ground to the east, and the commander had a rough understanding of where the population shelters were and how many people were inside them. Then the commander looked at the notebook in Vane's hand, looked at the translation unit, asked, in the halting way everything got asked through the unit, what he was writing. Vane said, "The end." The commander looked at him. Her expression did something he did not have the vocabulary to read yet. Then she said something short. The unit took a moment. It rendered, "Little early for that." Vane looked at her. She had already turned back to her people. Already moving. Already in the middle of three things at once in the way she seemed to always be in the middle of things. He stood in the open ground with the translation unit and the notebook and the cracked stylus. He wrote. The creature appeared to be under a fundamental misapprehension about the situation. His stylus did not move for 11 seconds after that. He counted. He had a very accurate internal sense of time. 11 seconds, approximately, in which he sat with the unit and the notebook and did not write anything at all. Her name was something his mouth could not make. He tried it twice, alone in the library that evening, working from the phonetic approximation the translation unit had given him. The sounds required a specific arrangement of the tongue and the back of the throat that the Sci-Fi vocal structure simply did not have. He wrote the name down in the notebook, looked at it, and on the next line wrote, "The Commander." That was what she would be in the record. She had not objected. He suspected she had not noticed. She called him Doc. He had documented this on the first day. He had not found an explanation for it that satisfied him. His title was Elder Scribe. His function was documentation. The word Doc did not appear anywhere in the Sci-Fi language index, and when he ran it through the translation unit, it returned 3 possible meanings, none of which matched his actual role with any precision. She said it the way she said most things, quickly, without looking up, already moving on to whatever came next. It did not feel like a mistake. It felt like a decision she had made in approximately 1 second, and had no intention of revisiting. He wrote it in the record. The commander has assigned me a designation. I have elected not to correct her. The strategy meetings began on the second morning. The Sci-Fi had 3 military advisors left. Peln, who was the eldest and spoke the least. Soru, who spoke the most and was usually right. And a younger one named Dav, who had taken 2 injuries in the advanced scout attack, and moved with a careful stiffness that he did not acknowledge, and no one mentioned. They met in the large ground floor room of the building next to the library, which had good sight lines to the eastern ridgeline, and a table big enough to spread maps across. Vane sat in the corner, with the translation unit and the notebook, and translated as accurately as he could, which was imperfectly, because the unit was better than it had been, but still rendered certain concepts as approximations, and certain words as blanks. The commander laid out the defensive structure, where her people would position, how they would use the terrain, what they needed from the Sci-Fi in terms of local knowledge, underground passages, water sources, the specific geography of the eastern approach that only people who had lived beside it for generations would know. Then Soru went through the projected numbers, Drakval ground force estimates, comparative strength, likely casualty figures on both sides under 3 different defensive scenarios. He presented it the way the Sci-Fi presented difficult information, clearly, completely, without softening the edges, because softening the edges of bad data only made the decisions worse. The casualty figures were not good under any of the 3 scenarios. The commander listened to all of it. She asked 2 questions, both specific, both practical. She looked at the maps while Soru was still talking, tracing something with 1 finger. When Soru finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yeah, that's fine." The translation unit rendered this correctly. Vane checked it twice. Pell looked at Soru. Soru looked at Dav. Dav looked at his hands. Vane wrote, "She appeared to understand the projected casualty estimates and treated them as a variable rather than a conclusion. This is not how the Sci-Fi process projected casualty estimates. Then he added, I am not certain yet whether this is a failure of comprehension or a difference in framework. Continuing to observe. He worked on the translation unit through the night. Not the spoken functions, those were as good as they were going to get, without more time than they had. He worked on the conceptual index, the deep layer of the unit that matched not just words, but the ideas behind them. The unit had been built for trade contact and basic diplomatic exchange. It was not built for what he was trying to do with it now, which was understand how another species thought. He kept running into the same wall. The Solvari language had been built across 4,000 years by people who were very good at loss. They had 47 distinct words for different qualities of grief. The grief of distance, the grief of misunderstanding, the grief of watching something end that you had loved, the grief that came after so long that it stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like weather. They had words for all of it. They had spent centuries getting precise about it. What they did not have, what he could not find anywhere in the entire index, in any form, was a word that meant we refuse. Not resist, not fight, not push back. Those existed. They were practical words, action words, words about what the body did. Refuse was something else. Refuse meant you had been handed an outcome, and you had looked at it, and you had sent it back. It meant the outcome was not acceptable, not because you had the power to stop it, but because you had decided it was not acceptable. And that decision came first, before the power, before the plan, before everything. The Solvari did not have that word, because they had never needed it. When things could not be stopped, they were documented and mourned and eventually accepted. That was not weakness. It was how a civilization of scholars survived long enough to build 4,000 years of history. But it meant there was a concept, walking around on two legs, out there in the eastern field, that his entire language could not hold. He wrote in the record, they carry a word we do not have. I am beginning to suspect this is the relevant fact. On the afternoon of the second day, he heard the commander laugh. He was crossing the open ground between the buildings with a fresh charge pack for the translation unit. Her people were at their positions, running checks, doing the quiet preparatory work that he had begun to recognize as their version of what he did at his desk, putting things in order before the moment arrived. One of her soldiers said something. He did not catch it through the unit. It was short, and she was 15 meters away, and the wind was wrong. She laughed, loud and sudden and completely real, the kind of laugh that did not check whether it was appropriate before it came out. The soldier grinned. Two others nearby looked over and grinned too, because that kind of laugh was the kind that spread whether you wanted it to or not. Vayan stopped walking. He stood in the open ground with the charge pack in his hands and looked at her. It had been weeks since anyone on this planet had laughed at anything. He had not counted the days specifically, but he was certain of it. Laughter required a particular relationship with the future, some small belief that there was a future in which the thing that was funny could be appreciated. A future in which you would still be there to appreciate it. He did not know what to do with this data. He wrote it down anyway. That evening, Sela found him in the library. The boy looked better than he had in days. Something in his posture had changed. Some of the weight had shifted. He had spent the afternoon near the human positions, watching, staying out of the way young scholars learn to do. He told Vane that he had asked one of the soldiers why they came. Not the tactical reason. Not the strategic calculation. He had asked why. Actually thought. Pausing, looking at something in the middle distance, the way people looked when they were searching for the honest answer, rather than the easy one. Then the soldier had said, "We heard someone was gonna get wiped out." Sela waited. Vane waited with him, the same way, for the rest of the answer. There was no rest of the answer. Sela sat down across from Vane at the table. Outside, the red evening light was coming through the windows. 40 hours until the Drakval arrived. Vane wrote the soldiers' words down exactly as they had been said. He did not add a comment. Sometimes the record did not need one. The hour before the Drakval arrived was the quietest thing Vane had ever heard. Not silent. Quiet was different from silent. Silent was the absence of sound. Quiet was sound pulling itself in, making itself small, as if the world was holding something in its chest and had not yet decided whether to let it out. The humans were at their positions along the eastern ridgeline and in the shallow ground between the buildings. Some of them were still. Some moved in small ways, checking things, adjusting things, the same gestures repeated with the patience of people who had learned that the hands needed something to do in the hour before. One of them, far down the line, was playing music from a small device clipped to his equipment. Something with a low, steady rhythm, something that had no business existing in this moment, and existed anyway. Vane was on the roof of the library. He was not armed, and would not have known what to do with a weapon if one had been handed to him. But the roof gave him a clear view of the ridgeline and the open ground below it, and his job was to see clearly and write accurately, and he intended to do his job until there was no more job to do. He had his notebook. He had the cracked stylus. He had the translation unit on his belt, though he did not expect to need it for translation anymore. He wrote, "The Drakval are approaching from the eastern ridge as projected. The humans are in position. The morning light is coming from the south and is very clear. I note this because it seems like the kind of detail that should be in the record. I am not certain why." He stopped, read that last sentence back, left it in. The Drakval came over the ridge the way they always came, in formation, structured, each unit knowing its place and its function. Vane had studied their engagement records in the weeks before they arrived. They were effective. They were consistent. They had taken 43 civilizations across 2 centuries, and they had done it with the same method each time, refined and adjusted and made more efficient with each use. The way any tool got better the more it was used. They saw the humans and stopped. Not a full stop, a hesitation, brief, almost invisible, the kind of pause that only existed if you were watching for it. Then they reformed and continued. Vane wrote, "First contact. The Drakval formation adjusted upon visual identification of the human forces. The adjustment was small. I do not know yet what it means." Then the noise arrived, and writing became difficult. What he managed across the next hour was not his best work. The sentences broke apart, started, and did not finish. Some were just marks he made without meaning to. The stylus moving because his hand needed it to move, while the rest of him watched. The Drakval held the northern line. The humans went through it anyway. There are protocols for this. The Drakval have protocols for everything. The humans were not in the protocols. He watched a unit of 12 humans hit a Drakval position that had held against Solvari resistance for 6 days 2 weeks ago. It held for 4 minutes against the humans. Then, it did not hold. He watched the commander move. She was never in one place long enough to become a target. She communicated constantly, short, sharp, directing her people with a sureness that did not look like confidence, because confidence was a thing you displayed. This was something quieter. She simply knew what to do next, and did it and expected her people to be where she needed them, and they were. He watched Dav, the young Solvari advisor, standing at a forward observation post, with 2 human soldiers on either side of him, relaying information about the underground passages the Drakval were trying to use to flank the eastern position. Dav's injured side made his movements stiff, but his voice through the communication unit was steady. The 2 humans listened to him and moved on what he said without hesitation, treating his knowledge like the valuable thing it was. Vane wrote, "They use what is given to them. They do not sort it first by who gave it." Then the corridor happened. The civilian evacuation corridor ran along the southern edge of the city, a wide passage between two old storage buildings that led down to the shelter access points. If the Drakval reached it and collapsed it, the people in the shelters below would lose their secondary exit. Standard tactic. The Drakval had used it in 31 of their 43 recorded engagements. Close the exits. Remove the option of running. The will to resist followed the option of running out the door. A Drakval flanking unit broke from the main engagement and moved toward the corridor. Vane saw it from the roof. He saw the commander see it too. He watched her counter available people, which took approximately 2 seconds, and he saw on her face the specific arithmetic of someone who has more problems than solutions, and is deciding which problem gets the smallest solution she can spare. 7 soldiers moved to the corridor. Not 8, not 20, 7. They went at a run, and they reached the corridor entrance ahead of the Drakval flanking unit, and they stopped, and they held. He wrote with a precision that was not normal for him. Every detail, every position, every movement he could track from the roof. He described the ground. He described the light. He described the way the 7 humans used the space between the buildings, how they communicated with each other, the economy of how they moved. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. He wrote for 40 minutes. He did not look up from the notebook except to look back at the corridor. He did not think about why his hands needed this. He simply kept writing, because the record needed to be accurate, and it needed to be complete, and these 40 minutes needed to be in it properly, every second of them, because something was happening in that corridor that he did not have the framework to name yet, but that he understood, in some place below his thinking, was important. 7 soldiers, 40 minutes. The corridor did not fall. Then the Drakval pulled back, not from the corridor, from the field, from the whole engagement. The main formation began to compress and redirect, the structured precision of it working now in the opposite direction, pulling inward instead of pushing forward. It was organized. It was not panicked, but it was retreat, regardless of how organized it looked, and the Drakval did not retreat. Vane looked at his notebook. He wrote, "The Drakval, who have no word for retreat, have invented one." He put the stylus down. He sat on the roof of the library with his notebook open on his knees, and the morning light coming from the south, and the sound of the engagement changing below, less and less, the noise pulling back with the Drakval formation, leaving behind the kind of quiet that was different from the quiet before, something with more air in it. He did not write anything. For the first time in 60 years of service, Vane sat with an open notebook and an empty page, and did not write. He was not crying. He checked. He was not. His vision had a quality to it that was not fully clear, but that was environmental. The dust from the engagement was still in the air. He documented it as such. He was still sitting there when the commander found him. She came up through the roof access door, and stood beside him, and looked out at the ridgeline, where the Drakval had been. She did not say anything for a while. She had a cut along her jaw that had been seen to, but not properly. She was carrying her helmet in one hand, and had the particular look of someone who had been running on something other than sleep for a long time, and had not yet told her body the running was over. She looked at the open notebook, the empty page. She asked how the record was coming. Vane said there appeared to be gaps. She nodded. She sat down next to him on the low roof wall, which she had not expected. She looked out at the field below, the evidence of the morning, the ground that had been contested and was no longer contested, the corridor that stood. She said, "We can fill them in later." She was watching the field with a tired and steady expression. He did not know if she meant the record. He wrote both possibilities down. He was thorough that way. The record required accuracy, and sometimes accuracy meant admitting that a thing could mean more than one thing, and you did not know yet which one it was. He would find out later. There was, apparently, a later. The Drakval did not send a message. There was no formal communication, no negotiation, no document signed between two parties in a room somewhere, no moment that could be pointed to and called the end. The Solvari Council waited for one, because that was how endings had always worked in their history. A conclusion arrived at through dialogue, through the careful exchange of terms, through words on a page that both sides agreed to. What they received instead was silence from the Eastern approach. Then updated tracking data showing the Drakval fleet adjusting its position in the outer system. Then over the following days, more adjustments. The fleet moved, slowly at first, then with clear intention. It left. The system simply dropped off their maps. No explanation, no acknowledgement that the Solvari existed, or that anything had happened here. The Drakval had come to erase a civilization, and had encountered an obstacle they had not prepared for, and had made a calculation and moved on to other business. That was all it was to them. To the Solvari it was something that required a word they did not have. Vane spent a morning on it. He went through the language index the same way he had gone through it, looking for refuse, carefully, completely, checking every entry that came close, and finding that none of them arrived at the right place. Victory was too large. Relief was too simple. Survival had the right shape, but pointed in the wrong direction, backward toward the danger, rather than forward toward what came after. He went to the translation unit. He ran the concept through it. What they had experienced. What word the humans used for the specific condition of having faced an ending and come out the other side of it still present and still whole. The unit returned one word. One. He sat with it for a while. It was a short word, blunt. It had none of the texture he would have expected for something this large. It did not capture the 47 kinds of grief that had preceded it, or the weeks of sealed vaults, or the cracked stylus, or the 7 soldiers in the corridor, or any of the rest of it. But it was accurate, and accuracy was what the record required. He wrote, "We have searched our language for the appropriate term for this outcome. We have not found one. We are borrowing a word from the humans. The word is one." He read it back 3 times, left it exactly as it was. The humans began packing on the 4th day after the Drakval left. They did it the same way they did everything, with speed and noise and a complete lack of ceremony, treating departure the same way they had treated arrival, as a practical problem to be solved efficiently rather than a moment to be marked. Equipment was broken down and loaded. The drop pod casings, cracked open on the first day, were collected and stacked. Things were checked and counted and secured. Vane watched from the library window. He had his notebook, but he was not writing. He was watching in the way he sometimes watched the red evening sky, not to document it, just to see it while it was still there to be seen. Some of the humans moved through the city before they left, not in groups, individually or in pairs, walking through the streets that were beginning to fill again as people came up from the shelters. They moved slowly, which was unusual for them. They looked at the buildings, the old stonework, the library with its narrow windows and its thick walls. Some of them stopped to talk to Solvari civilians through the translation units that had been distributed from Vane's office. He did not know what was said in most of those conversations. He documented what he observed, which was this. The humans handed things to people as they passed, small objects, things from their pockets, from their equipment, things with no military value, and no obvious purpose beyond the fact of being given. A Solvari child near the library entrance received something bright and small from a tall human soldier, who crouched down to hand it over, and said something that made the child's caretaker cover her face with both hands, in the way the Solvari covered their faces when something hit them in a place they had not expected to be hit. Vane wrote, "The exchange of objects appears to be a ritual of some kind, I do not have a full analysis of its meaning. My current working theory is that it means, I was here, and I am leaving, and I want you to have something that confirms both of those things. He was not certain this theory was correct. He did not cross it out. The commander came to the library on the last morning. She looked better than she had on the roof. The cut on her jaw had closed properly, and she had slept, he could tell, more than 4 hours for once. She still moved with the efficiency that he had come to think of as simply the way she existed in space. But there was less urgency in it now. The urgency had somewhere to go. She came in through the main doors and looked at the shelves and the vault shells, still lining the eastern wall. The 12th one still open, and she walked over to his desk and sat in the chair across from him, the way Sela sat in it, without asking, without ceremony, as though chairs were for sitting in, and that was the end of the analysis. They went through the formal closing of the joint engagement. It did not take long. She had a document her counsel had prepared, and he had a document his counsel had prepared, and they exchanged them, and confirmed that the exchange had occurred, and that was the official record of the whole thing, 2 pages, very clean. Then she put the documents in her jacket, and did not immediately stand up. Vane looked at her across the desk. He asked her why they came. Not the tactical reason. He had that. It was in the record. It was accurate and complete. He asked her the question Sela had asked the soldier, the one with no second part to the answer. She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for the diplomatic version. The quiet of someone going past the first answer and the second answer to find the true one. She said, "We've been where you are." She said nothing else. He waited. The way Sela had waited. The way the record waited for the rest of a sentence that was going to complete itself. It did not complete itself. He understood, sitting at his desk in the library with the morning light coming through the narrow windows, that it was not going to. That somewhere in human history there had been a moment like this one. A vault being sealed, a record being written, a civilization making its peace with an ending. And that the humans had come out of it and remembered it the way you remembered the specific weight of a thing you had carried for a long time. He did not ask her to say more. He was a scholar. He understood when a thing was complete. She stood, pulled her jacket straight, picked up her helmet from the corner of his desk where she had set it when she came in. She looked at the cracked stylus on the desk between them, looked at it for a moment the way he sometimes looked at it. Then she looked at him. She said, "Finish the record, Doc." Then she left. He listened to her boots on the stone floor, the main door, then nothing. The library was very quiet around him. Not the quiet of before, not the pulled-in, held-breath quiet of the days before the Drakval came, but the ordinary quiet of a room full of books in a city that was still standing. He picked up the cracked stylus. He opened the 12th vault shell, took out the ongoing record, turned to the last page, where the first line of the final entry had been sitting alone since the first night, waiting for what came after it. We were not a warrior people. This was once considered irrelevant. He read it. Then he wrote beneath it, "It may still be. But we have now stood beside those who are, and we have watched them refuse, on our behalf, to accept an outcome we had already finished grieving. The record cannot hold what this costs a species to do for strangers. The record cannot hold what it gives the strangers to receive it. Some things are too large for accurate language and must simply be noted and left to sit on the page and mean what they mean. The humans came because they heard someone was going to be wiped out. That was the whole reason. As the record shows, we are here." He set the stylus down, took the ongoing record, and placed it inside the 12th vault shell and sealed it. The seal clicked shut, with the same small sound the other 11 had made, precise, final, a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. He picked up the cracked stylus. He looked at it for a moment. He put it in his jacket pocket. The vault could keep everything else. This one thing he was going to keep himself. There would be tomorrow and the day after, and the long work of whatever came next, for a civilization that had packed itself away for an ending, and now had to unpack itself for a beginning. He stood up. He walked to the library door and opened it. Outside, the city was filling with sound.